So, Toby, welcome to Disabled and Proud. How are you today?
I'm not too bad, thank you. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm really good, thank you. I'm really looking forward to this chat because, and I say this every week, I feel like I learn so much when I have these conversations, and I'm really looking forward to talking to you about your disability and life because I think this will be just a really good chat. And I've watched your videos and they're really funny, so
Oh, bless
hopefully
you.
that
No, I'm excited
translates.
too. Yeah, 100%.
So, the first question that I like to ask every single guest is, how do you refer to your disability?
I guess, well, the condition that I have is retinitis pigmentosa, but I just like to call myself a blind man. I think a lot of people like to tread on eggshells around disability, but for me, just straight shoot it. I'm just blind.
Yeah, and is that something that were you born blind, or is it degenerative where your eyesight gets worse?
Yeah, it's degenerative. So RP is a genetic condition. I've always been visually impaired. So I was diagnosed as registered blind at the
Mm.
age of 2, but I still had like enough vision to do things like read and
Uh-huh.
play football with my mates. But then into my teen years, it sort of deteriorated a lot quicker. And
Yeah.
then at the age of 16, that's when I sort of started referring to myself as sort of blind.
Okay. And so for you, so when you say like, because I know that being legally registered blind doesn't always mean that you can't see anything. You can see light is like,
Mhm.
or like I know it's completely dependent upon the person, but what's it like for you? Can you see light or is it nothing for you?
Yeah, so it's not just nothing or black. It is,
Mm.
yeah, it's very difficult to explain what you see. Like if I asked you
Yeah.
to explain what you see, it's really hard to like articulate that in something that's
Mhm.
actually coherent. Um, yeah, so I get input of light. I can tell when the light changes. If I were to flick a
Uh-huh.
light switch on when the room was dark, and obviously if it went bright, I'd know that a light had come on.
Yeah.
Um, I can kind of see shapes if the contrast is right. So I always say, actually, this is really good. I've got a dark jumper on today. I've got my hands are very pale at the minute.
Yeah.
If I was looking directly at my jumper, I could tell that there was something on my jumper.
Uh-huh.
But if I were to put my hand in front of my hand, I wouldn't know that there's a difference because there's no contrast.
Wow. I
If that
love
makes
this.
sense.
I'm learning so much because I have like no exposure to visual impairment whatsoever. It's so far away from my own disability, and that's why I always find having these conversations with people whose disabilities are totally different from mine so interesting because disability is such an umbrella term that actually it doesn't represent the masses correctly, but that's
100%. Do you know, it's
difficult.
actually, it weirds me out how little experience people have with people with disabilities. Whenever I'm talking to someone and I'm like, oh, have you ever met a blind person before? And they're like, no, I've seen someone walking with a cane or a guide dog before, but never actually spoken or interacted to a blind person. And that kind of
Yeah.
weirds me out a bit because we're not like a rare species, but
It's so true.
it's weird, isn't it?
It is. And also, I think what's even funnier is when you talk to someone else with a disability, there are so many things that you will have so many common and shared experiences
Mm.
that nobody else will ever understand as to why it's funny or amusing or like
Honestly, that's what I
tragic.
get with some of my videos is I'll post a video that's really specific to people with disabilities. And a lot of people who have never experienced a disability or interacted with someone with a disability, well, I don't get it. And then I'll have the whole disabled community just laughing their asses off.
Yeah, it's so, so true. And what was it like for you growing up with a disability? Because I think being a disabled child and having that translate into adulthood is very different from when you acquire a disability. So I was wondering, what was it like for you?
Oh, I'd love to go back to being 5 again. Yeah, I mean, my parents did a really good job at like making me feel like I was just a normal kid. Um,
Mhm.
they always threw me in at the deep end. If I was ever nervous about doing something, be like, just give it a go. Just give it a go. Don't
Yeah.
let your visual impairment stop you. And I think that's the best way to do it because that's translated to me being quite confident now in my older years. I knew that I was like visually impaired growing up, but like I don't know, my peers treated me the same. I was able to do 95% of the things that they did.
Yeah.
So my experience as a kid wasn't too different, but then my experience as like an adolescent was very different.
Yeah. Are you able to like delve into that? Because I'm quite intrigued because as you say, it's degenerative. So when you start to like have less sight as such, how does that, especially as a teen, because obviously that's like around exam time, like studying time, like how does that all work?
Yeah, so I think the main difference was when I was in primary school, one, my vision was like better,
Yeah.
but two, the kids there knew no different. Like from reception, they knew me as Toby has a visual impairment. His eyes aren't as good as ours.
Mm.
Okay, cool. And that was the same all the way up to like year six until you go into secondary school.
Yeah.
Then I go into secondary school, my eyesight's a lot less stable.
Uh-huh.
So I started off still being a pretty normal kid. I mean, I had a laptop in class, and that was about it, really. And I was playing football with all my friends and doing things, but then it got to the stage where it started to deteriorate a lot quicker, and I had to stop doing things like that. And actually, a lot of like my friends didn't know how to react to that. And fair enough, do you know what I mean? They're young, but it meant that I got quite isolated, in quite a difficult time. So yeah, my secondary school experience wasn't great, just because kids will be kids, I guess.
Yeah. And I think that's a really interesting point, isn't it? Is that sometimes that people are ignorant not for the sake of being ignorant, they just don't know. And it's
Yeah,
not until
100%.
they're
You don't get taught, do you? Like
yeah.
in primary school, I don't. Maybe you do now. I don't know. Everything's a lot more inclusive now, but I'd learn about science experiments in primary school, not how does someone lose their vision? How does that feel? Do you know what I mean? So
Yeah.
I don't blame any of them. I'm not resentful to the kids. It's just one of those things where I did get isolated.
Yeah. And around studying time and around being like a teenager, that must have been really interesting for you because obviously like being a teenager in itself is horrendous. Like I wouldn't go back there for anyone. Like you could not
Not a
pay me enough
chance.
money to go back.
Not a
Like
chance.
no, like nobody wants to relive it. But I wonder what it was like for you specifically. And I don't know why, but my brain is like, ask about exams because how how does that work for you? Because obviously you won't be able to read an exam paper. So I take it you would have everything in Braille.
Do you know what? I'm actually a bit of a moron, and I don't read Braille. Um, I'm completely illiterate, can't read. It's a weird one. So
Uh-huh.
my exams were double time, so
Yeah.
100% extra time, which meant a 2.5 English exam would turn into a 5 hour English exam.
Oh, that sounds so painful.
Oh, that was honestly rough. Um, so I'd have my laptop, and the paper would be like translated into a computer version for me, which then I'd actually have a member of staff read to me, and then I'd type my answer out. Because I hadn't learned how to use a screen reader at that point. So the
Uh-huh.
software that, like reads out things on your screen for you for blind people. I hadn't learned that because I was such a
Yeah.
stubborn kid. I was like, I don't want to learn that, which I really should have. So yeah, exams were difficult in that sense, but I got through them. I did well in my GCSEs and A levels and
Yeah.
stuff, but it would have been a much smoother process if I hadn't have been so stubborn.
But I love that that's an admission that you're willing to make. Is that like, yeah, I was just too stubborn. Like it's
Oh,
just
100%. Honestly, if I could give advice to any young person, it's just make sure you're prepared for things like that. If you know it, the thing is, I had no excuse. Like I knew I was losing my vision. I should have been preparing, but no, I was such a pain to my teachers and parents as a younger kid.
but actually it's good that you can look back now and be like, actually, yeah, I was a bit of a pain, but like, we all learn, we all grow.
100. Well, I wouldn't be like where I am now and be able to sort of, I don't know, it's given me that mindset now of do everything you can to prepare yourself for situations, which is more important as an adult, I feel, than it is as a kid. Kids
Yeah,
are
for
far
sure.
more adaptable and resilient than we are. So I
For
think it might be a
sure.
good thing in the long run.
And with that, how has this all translated to your career and what career path you've chosen to go down? Because I always find talking to people with disabilities, we do have we have a natural set of skills that a lot of other people don't have. Like we're brilliant problem solvers. We always think outside the box. Nothing is ever really too much of a hassle because we've probably dealt with something worse. So for you, how did that translate for what choices you made in your career path?
That's a really good question, actually, because I'll go back to the stubborn point. I was
Yeah.
obsessed with sport.
Uh-huh.
And I wanted to be like a personal trainer, or I used to be a sprinter, so I wanted to be an
Yeah.
athletics coach. And actually, they're not. I mean, it can be done as a blind person, but it's not the most accessible career path to go down. And it took me a long time to realize that actually. So then, obviously, you've got to think, okay, what can I do? What am I one interested in and passionate about, and two,
Mhm.
what do my skill set help me with? So I decided to go down the psychology route and looked at psychology and counselling degrees.
Uh-huh.
Um, and yeah, I figured out I'm naturally quite like an empathetic person, and good under pressure, those kind of things. So yeah, I looked down that, and that's eventually the degree that I went down.
Uh-huh. And I love that I think you're right. I think, having a natural skill set, I think empathy is something that disabled people are like, it's naturally instilled in them, because there have been so many times where you've been like left on the side and you're like, just want to play. And then you're like, no, like I'm going to help someone else out. And I think that's a really beautiful way of using a natural skill set.
I think being disabled, like you've experienced every emotion, like it's such a roller
Yeah.
coaster. One day you can do something that you never thought you'd be able to do, and you'll be like euphoric and so proud of yourself. And then other days you'll be the lowest of lows and be hating life and frustrated with everything. So it's such a roller coaster, which means that you get such an emotional maturity, I feel, and you mature a lot quicker. I find that's a trend that I find in disabled people is they've had so much life experience that they do mature quicker. So yeah, I think that route that I found naturally fitted me really well.
Yeah. And how did you start posting? Like, what made you start posting on TikTok? Because I love it. I think TikTok has just exploded, and I think what the platform can do is incredible. But I'm always intrigued to know how people like first think about when they're first going to post and how it exploded and how it worked for them.
It was it was such a spontaneous thing. Like I
Mhm.
was still looking for like jobs in the NHS at the time. I was never thinking that I'd be able to like do content creation full time or
Yeah.
work in social media. But I'd been to the Russell Howard show in September, and
Uh-huh.
a clip of me at that show went viral with a disabled comedian who asked me what my favorite disability was. So naturally, I hold up my cane,
Uh-huh.
and everyone loves that. And someone obviously clipped that, and it went viral. And naturally, there were lots of questions in that comment section asking
Yeah.
like, "Why is the blind guy wearing sunglasses? Why is he in the front row?" All these kind of things. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I was like, oh, okay, let's answer some of these in a video. And you know,
Uh-huh.
had a few takes of this video that I was trying to make, and the first one was really gun ho and calling everyone idiots, like what a stupid question. And my girlfriend had to be like, I reckon you should maybe like tone it down a little bit, which actually was a really good decision. And that video ended up getting loads of traction, doing really well.
Hmm.
So I just thought, okay, let's see where it goes. And for some reason, it got traction, my page, and we're here 6 months, 5 months down the line, and sitting pretty.
Yeah, and I think it's amazing, isn't it? Because I remember doing a video not like dissimilar to that, where I was actually calling out the government, and actually like it was quite strong. And then afterwards I
Yeah,
was like, oh, like that was a really angry disabled post. Like and it's because I think you're
yeah,
so like in your mind, and like in your mind, in my mind, like when you say something about disability, it's so obvious because it's our lived experience. And it might not be obvious to like your average Joe blogs, because it's not something they think about, and it's not their like reality. And so when I think about these things, I'm like, oh, like maybe I do need to tone it down, and maybe I do need to take a step back.
it's really hard though, because like obviously our day-to-day experience, I feel like a lot of people say like, "Oh, you're such an inspiration for sharing your story," and for me, it's just like, well, I'm just giving out information. It's not. It doesn't take me
Mhm.
much effort to do. I don't find myself particularly inspirational, but I think the reason why people like my content is because for the longest time I was really polite and I was
Yeah,
answering questions as if the person had never, as if they were an alien and didn't know what a blind
yeah,
person was. And I've only had a couple of videos where I have been a bit snappy or a bit forceful, and actually I slightly regret them now because of the point
uh-huh.
you've just said, that people just don't know. They're asking questions most of the time because they just want to find out, not because they're trying to take the mic.
Yeah. And that's like a really solid point, isn't it? Is that people are naturally curious, and it's actually how the questions ask, not necessarily what the question is. Because I think, it's different in person, but online, I think people are just generally inquisitive, and you can kind of tell when someone's trying to be a bit rude or a bit like sarky, and you just don't
Yeah,
respond to that because it's unnecessary.
I feel like I really want to sometimes, but actually, someone made on one of the videos where I did snap back, it was about how do I read the comments? Like, if I'm
Mhm.
blind, how do you read comments? And for me, that's so obvious. Like, we've had screen reading technology for decades now.
Yeah.
And I just got a bit annoyed because I had about 8 or 9 comments in a row on the same video being like, how you reading comments? How you read? And I was like, oh, okay. So I did make a bit of a like lashy out video, but
Yeah.
someone commented on that video saying, you've worked so hard to create like this space and community where people feel like empowered or comfortable asking questions, but maybe they're not comfortable to ask maybe in real life or to other creators. So maybe next time think about the way you deliver a video. And normally I'd read that and be like, okay. But that actually really resonated with me. I was like, actually, maybe I should tone it down and, treat people, as just curious people rather than people who take the mick.
Yeah, for sure. And I like that someone wrote that, and like that's actually quite like a well thought out answer. Like, just
Yeah, yeah,
FYI, like you've created a really beautiful space, and this
literally.
is not really like you, but like have a cup of tea and like you'll be fine.
Legit, it hit me. I got a bit like not emotional at it, but that's what made me regret it because I was like, that poor person, because obviously naturally when you've got a following, you've got very loyal followers. And if
Yeah.
you make a stern point at someone, they will then get ridiculed in that comment section by the followers. I
Mm.
felt really bad. I was like, I've just caused that problem. Maybe that person some kind of distress from this when
Yeah.
actually they may have just been curious. So that's a rookie mistake from me. Obviously, I haven't been doing the media stuff very long, but for sure in the future, I will make sure to just answer as politely as possible.
Yeah. So it's you've already brought this up, and it's a question that I like to ask anyway. And generally, people answer both sides of this question. And it's, do you have a piece of advice for either a younger version of yourself or a younger person with the same disability as you?
Yeah, so I touched on earlier, obviously,
Yeah.
about the making sure you're prepared. That for me is always number one, because you avoid so much hassle when eventually, especially in my case, where as I said, I knew it was coming. I knew that I'd lose my vision. I knew that I'd have to adapt one day. If I'd learned how to use technology or maybe learn Braille or whatever, the whole you learn how to use a cane.
Yeah.
The process would have become far more easier. But the other bit of advice that I'd give myself, and it's quite bespoke to me to be fair, but I know that there are a lot of people like me who are stubborn and have one singular goal in life.
Yeah.
Plan A is like amazing, and you should put lots of effort into plan A and like really aspire for plan A to come true, but
Yeah.
make sure that plan B is bulletproof, because quite often plan A can just crumble right in front of you. And if you don't have a plan B, you're going to be really, really lost.
I think I might take that into my own life.
What a
That
bit of
is
advice. I've got it for you. There you go.
that is so good. I love that. I love that like strive for plan A, but make sure that your plan B will also like work out too. Oh my God, I love that. I think
100%.
that's a really good piece of advice. And this is
I've only really learned it recently though, because obviously going into content creation, like taking that full time is a big step for me
yeah.
personally. Like it's a bit of a risk, you know what I mean? Being self-employed,
Uh-huh.
income fluctuates month to month. But I guess for plan B, and this is where plan B is bulletproof, is I've got a degree in counseling psychology and I can just go back to the original plan. Do you know what I mean? So
Yeah.
it's something I've realized recently, but it's something I'll always keep with me now, I think.
Yeah. I love that so much. And actually, you were talking about assistive technology. And I was wondering if you could explain to me a bit about it, because obviously I know absolutely nothing. So what is assistive technology, and like where do you use it around the house or in life? And how do you learn to use it? Because obviously it's a learning process as well. Like do you go to the NHS? Like where do you go to for all of these like pieces of equipment that will help?
Yeah, it's really, really tough to learn all of these things. And as you
Mm.
just pointed out, there are lots of different types of technology that can help. So
Yeah.
it can get very confusing and a bit like a spider's web where things cross over and overlap, but they're also a different part of the web. So
Yeah.
I guess the main two bits of assistive technology I use are on my phone and iPad, which is called VoiceOver.
Hmm.
And that basically reads out everything that my finger touches. So I can use my phone by myself. So it'll read out my texts, my emails, any links that are on the page,
Yeah.
anything like that. And there's lots of different like tips and tricks you can do with that to make it more efficient and whatnot.
Mm.
And then there is my laptop, which I use software called JAWS, which is the most complicated thing in the world. Like it literally drove me crazy trying to use it. I've been using it now for 4 years, and I used it
Uh-huh.
all the way through uni, and I can literally just about type out a document and send an email. Do you know
Oh
what I
my
mean?
gosh. Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm not the best learner of those things in
Uh-huh.
fairness, but yeah, it's very complicated. But yeah, I was very lucky that the disability student DSA. It's
Yeah,
called the DSA. I
DSA.
can't remember what it stands for. But they funded all of the learning for me for that
Uh-huh.
at uni. If I wasn't at uni, I probably would have had to pay for that myself because there's
Yeah.
companies out there who do teach you how to use these kind of assistive technologies. But it was a very, very long process. And as I've probably, just made very clear, I'm not very good at using them still after all this time.
Yeah. And when it comes to walking with the cane, and how did you learn to use that? I mean, like obviously I'm absolutely assuming everything here, but did you learn to use that at a younger age, or was that something that came on when your like eyesight started to degenerate when you were a teen?
So your local council
Uh-huh.
has like obviously the disability department,
Yeah.
and they'll send out someone called a mobility officer who helps you learn how to navigate with whether
Yeah.
it's a cane or even without your cane if you've still got a fair bit of vision to like
Hmm.
common routes that you do. So it could be from your home to the local shop, could be around the
Yeah.
town or the city centre, those kind of things. Um, and I actually had my mobility officer when I was sort of 10, 11,
Yeah.
and she tried to get me to start learning how to use a cane. And I was so embarrassed. Like, I thought everyone was watching me, everyone was judging me. I
Yeah.
couldn't do it. So I stopped for a good few years. I mean, it was only when I started to lose my vision very, very quickly and it got very severe that I thought, oof, I'm tired of walking into lampposts and bumping into people and getting shouted at, saying, be
Yeah.
careful, watch where you're going type thing. So then I took the plunge when I was 16, I think.
Hmm.
And yeah, they taught me how to use my cane. And that's a very long process as well, because it takes a lot of confidence and concentration to use it well. But again, I learned how to use that way too late.
I love how you're fully admitting to yourself. You're like, yeah, I should have done it sooner, but actually I didn't. And like, it is what it is. But like, here we are. This is how it works.
Oh yeah, I'm an absolute idiot. Like I will throw my hands up and say straight down the camera, like, I'm an idiot. Do you know what I mean? But I'm here now. I'm still alive. No one got hurt in the process.
Yeah, I mean that is a benefit, right? Like you're still here, so it's all good.
It's really embarrassing.
But I do think I've had this conversation with Blaine Harrison, who is a member of the Mystery Jets, the band. And what he said is so right. He says, sometimes as disabled people, we try to keep up with the norm. Like we try to push our bodies to keep up with the norm. And actually our bodies aren't made that way. So therefore, we shouldn't try because it's never going to work out the same way. And it wasn't really until he said that actually it kind of clicked for me that I'm very heavily into CrossFit. A lot of my life revolves around fitness and as does yours. But actually, I get tired more. I get 30% more tired because of my limb difference. And that's like a stat that I didn't know until quite
Mm.
recently. And I was like, oh my God, it makes so much sense. So actually, it's no surprise
Yeah.
that you didn't, use your assistive technology. You didn't want to use your stick until, things were getting to the point where actually you were like, I need to do something about this because we do try to keep up. And I think that's a societal problem. It's not an us problem.
Definitely, it's a societal problem. Like, especially as a younger disabled person, you just want to fit in because you're
Yeah.
so, or like you're told that you're so different, and you want nothing more than to just be one of those popular kids. Do you know what I mean? So you push yourself to do these things and burn yourself out very quickly. It's really interesting that you get that kind of 30% more fatigue. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or quicker fatigue, sorry. I'm the same where if I concentrate too much on something, my eyes will get really sore. Or if I do lots in the day, like yesterday, I went into Brighton and did a few bits in Brighton for work and came back and
Mm.
I was absolutely shattered. Like my eyes were killing me. And you just got to slow down sometimes. And it's a really hard step to admit that you are slightly different and that's okay. But
Yeah.
as you said, that's not us problem. That's definitely a societal problem.
Yeah, for sure. And I like to ask everyone, because I think at some point everybody goes through some form of hardship, regardless of whether that's disability related or not, right? We all have our moments where we think that things are not going to get any better. And eventually, they do. But during those times, I always think if you can focus on like one positive attribute about yourself, or after you've been through your difficult time, if you can reflect back and think, oh, I did this one thing really, really well, then it's kind of been a worthwhile lesson. And I was wondering, have you recognized a positive attribute within yourself?
Yeah, I mean, it is really easy to just fixate on those negatives.
Hmm.
As you said, like when you think things aren't or can't get better, then you're always going to fixate on those negatives. I think something in myself that I'm really, really grateful for, and it's maybe not something that was learned, maybe it's something that's always there, is like I'm quite a tenacious person. Like, even if things are really, really bad, I'll just keep going. Like, I'm not really
Yeah.
someone to slump around and mope about. I will sometimes, obviously, like we all do. Like that's just part of being a human and having
Hmm.
hardships. But yeah, I'm quite grateful that I'm quite tenacious and determined to fix things. I like to fix the problem as soon as possible if I like can identify that there is a problem in the first place. I think
Yeah.
that's the difficult part is we don't know that there's a problem quite a lot of the time. You're just like in a bad place mentally.
Yeah.
And it's kind of identifying where you're like searching for the problem. What's making me feel like this? And sometimes it's really hard to find that. So yeah, it's a difficult one, but yeah, I'm quite tenacious. I'll take that one.
It's really funny that you say tenacious because that's usually my answer as well.
I love that.
I was like when I first started recording this earlier this year, I would always be like, oh, I think mine is tenacity because I always think I really go after what I want and I rarely give in. And if I have to pull out, it's usually for a reason that's not like my doing. And it's so I love the
Yeah.
fact that obviously like you haven't heard that. So this is completely like not scripted. This is completely like random. And that was the one that you went for. And as you were saying it, I was like smiling and I was like, this kid knows. This kid knows.
Oh, love that. It's such a valuable thing. I think as you can't generalize across a whole like demographic, obviously, but I think a lot of disabled people are really tenacious because, as we said earlier, you go through
Yeah.
so many emotions and so many like obstacles, but you have no choice but to be tenacious if you want to get past that next obstacle because another one's coming. Like I know another obstacle's coming. It could be next week, it could be next month, could be next year, but if you're not tenacious, then those obstacles come far quicker and they're way bigger and harder to get over.
That is, yeah, that's so accurate. And I've never really had someone explain that before the way that you have is that actually as a disabled person, you do find that obstacles are coming at you left, right, and center. And if you don't kind of either get over them, it's kind of sink or swim, really. And like I don't want to sink. I've got to swim. Like I've got goals that I
Yeah, I
want to
like
achieve. So
swimming.
we've got to get there. Like
Definitely, definitely.
and so I have, so yeah, I do have, these are like a set of questions that when people ask me, I'm a bit annoyed. That's the best way I can describe it, or they can be a bit intrusive. So I'll give you an example. Recently, I went away on holiday and someone asked me if they could cut up my food for my dinner. And at that point, I was like, this is not okay. But I was wondering, do you have like a set of questions that if people ask you, you're like, oh, this is a bit too much? Like, and this is not just like people online. This is, maybe like a randomer in the street or someone on the bus or someone that's kind of just come up to you to ask you a question.
I get the funny ones that make me laugh, but also do annoy me because it's like, what if you're asking this and like you're genuinely asking it, what do you think of me as a person? Like, how do I know when to stop wiping my bum? That one, honestly, that gets me every time.
Oh my God.
Honestly, I genuinely want to knock out every person who asks me that. I'm not going to answer that one on air. Um, sometimes it's more about like actions than questions. Like, for example, if I
Yeah.
stood at a road and like waiting for my time to cross, and someone just grabs me and pulls me across, that really like, can I swear on this podcast? I
Yeah,
won't
of
swear.
course you can. Crack
But
on.
that fucks me off, right?
Yeah.
Because I don't know, like I've had it before where I don't even want to cross the road and someone will just drag me across. And then I'm like, cool, can you take me back though, governor? And
Yeah.
like it's those types of things. So actually for me as a blind person, it's probably more about what people do rather than what
Uh-huh.
they say or ask, because I'm quite good with questions and actually there's not anything too intrusive. You
Mm.
can ask, I get how do you find the whole a lot intimately?
Oh,
That one
wow.
that one gets me as well. Like, come on, turn the lights off and you'll still find it, bud. But yeah, so I'm fine with it. It's more about actions for me.
It's really funny because so many people who come on this podcast, like the weird questions they get asked generally tend to be around sex, intimacy, and the toilet. And it's like people are so fascinated by these questions. And it doesn't matter like what your disability is. At some point, someone has had an inappropriate question surrounding those three areas. And I always find it funny because for us, they're questions that we would never dare ask anybody else. But for whatever reason, people find them fascinating.
I think it's because they can be like, I don't know, socially, obviously, sex and intimacy is quite taboo unless you're with people that you're very comfortable and close with. And
Yeah.
obviously, going to the toilet is just something that, like, who discusses that other than like poo scientists? I don't know what they're called, but those people that like investigate poo. Like, I don't know, they're just not very heavily discussed. So I think naturally people are curious about them. Like, if you could ask your best friends, like, oh, what kind of wipe technique do you use? You would, but it's seen as weird. So I think people see
Yeah.
someone with a disability who obviously experiences those things differently and thinks, oh, I can get away with asking about this now.
Yeah, I think you might be right on that one, actually. And I was wondering,
Good.
like, you obviously you go to the gym, you work out. Have you ever had any like comments in the gym about how you're working out, or how do you know that you're working out? Because I think that would be something that would be asked quite a lot, but obviously that's complete like assumption.
Do you know what? I think normally obviously I get loads of questions day to day, just naturally.
Yeah.
And I'm like, these are common sense. Like, these are a bit, come and figure it out yourself. But the workout questions, I will always embrace me. Like, that is fair enough.
Yeah.
I get a lot of like, how do you know if you're doing the right form? And I'm like, that's a great question. Fair enough.
Uh-huh.
I get that one a lot. How do you know if you're doing the exercises right? What's the point in go? And this is going to sound really harsh as a question, but I don't mind it that much. Like, why do you go if like you can't see the improvements? Like, how does that work? Like
Yeah.
motivation. I think that's a fair enough question because a lot of people who go to the gym are in it for like aesthetic purposes solely,
Mhm.
and kind of, I don't know, overlook the actual physical and mental benefits of exercising.
Yeah.
And I also get there's one more I get really regularly that I can't remember. Oh, do it like, can I go around by myself? Which is a no. Um,
Mhm.
unless I was in the gym by myself, and maybe that'll be a good video. Maybe I'll do that one day.
I've just given you such a great idea. Thanks so
That's,
much.
yeah. Thank you. I'll be off now.
And with working out, like, how did you get into that? Because you said that younger you were really into, was it football? So how did that transition into like the gym space?
Um, I've always been really like sporty.
Yeah.
So yeah, I love my football. I used to be a sprinter, so I used to run me 100 and 200 meters.
Yeah.
I was actually hoping to go to the Paralympics in 2020, but I did end up breaking my hip,
Oh,
unfortunately.
wow.
I had to put that one to the side. I can't really do that anymore, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But naturally, with things like sport comes additional training outside of a sport. So I was in the
Yeah.
gym doing sport related workouts. And then
Mhm.
after I broke my hip, I still wanted to stay as active as possible. And obviously, I like, naturally you've got physio and recovery to do for that anyway.
Yeah.
So yeah, I found kind of more bodybuilding type training. I never strive to
Yeah.
be a bodybuilder, but the concept of growing your body and pushing it to the like limit size wise really intrigued me. So I learned a lot about that, and yeah, was in the gym, I guess, constantly from about the age of 15.
I love that. I love that, unfortunately you did, like, you broke your hip, as you said, and that took you away from one thing, but actually it gave you something else. And now that's like a
Yeah,
big part of your life.
do you know what? It's probably the biggest event in my life because until that point, I was completely fixated on sport. I wasn't putting any effort into education. I was like, I'd
Yeah.
say to my teachers, like, no, I don't need to do this. I'm going to be paid to be an athlete. Like, it's fine. And they're like, what if you break your leg, mate? I'm like, no, I won't break my leg. Ended up breaking my hip. So they were kind of right in that sense. And do you know what? It
Yeah.
was such a big life event for me because after that, I did then. I think this is also where that plan A, plan B, like proverb comes from with me.
Yeah.
I did then put effort into education, and thankfully, like, I did end up getting good results because of it. So it wasn't just a good thing in terms of finding something else that I love, but also it did just change my life as a whole.
Yeah. And I think that that's a really, like, not everything that happens to you at the time is seen as a blessing, but actually upon reflection, it kind of is. And that,
100%.
you know, breaking your hip is like, that's a big bone to break. Like, do you mind if I ask how you did it? Did you fall off a chair? Like what happened?
I did not fall off a chair. No, no. It was on track actually. I had a competition. I think it was the first competition of the season, and I'd felt a little bit of strain in my hip like the weeks before in training. And I was
Yeah.
like, okay, we'll just see how this goes. not thinking anything of it really. And when you're younger, especially if you do a lot of sport and a lot of kind of weight related exercise, your muscles can get a lot stronger than your bones.
Yeah.
So I had really, really strong quad muscles apparently. And when I came up my blocks, my quad pulled off part of my hip. And then it just absolutely crunched it from there when I put my foot down, obviously, because when you're a sprinter, you put so much power through the floor. So
Yeah.
obviously my ball pulled off part of my bone, and then I stomped down on the floor to try and accelerate, and it just whoa.
Oh my God.
Oh my God, don't even, like, I never thought pain like that existed.
Oh yeah, I can like my hips now feel really funny.
I'm do you know, my hip still was like the part of the hip that got pulled off never sort of, I don't know if it was meant to refuse or like kind of generate back. I don't know, but like my hips are really uneven now. They look a bit weird apparently.
That's just what you want to hear as well.
Yeah, yeah, literally. Yeah, you look weird now, mate. You got this like debilitating injury and you look weird as well.
Yeah, like thank you so much for that. I
Cheers.
was
Appreciate
wondering,
it.
do you have any like myths around like vision or being blind that you want to quickly dispel whilst you're here?
Do you know what? I think that's the biggest problem, like with disability in general in society, is the stereotyping.
Oh yeah.
And like the myths for me, they're the ones that really grind my gears. I think some like innocent myths, like our senses are super heightened. That one's
Mhm.
not true. Like we just, if me and you did a hearing test, we'd probably have the same score. Do you know what I mean? It's just
Yeah.
I'm naturally better at using what hearing I've got.
Yeah.
Other myths. I guess the myth that we just walk around with shit in our pants all the time because we don't wipe properly. That's probably one. Uh, other than that, I don't know. You've put me on the spot there. I've probably got loads, but I can't think on the spot. That's pressure. That is.
I only have one final question for you,
Go on.
and that is, Toby, could you say that you are disabled and proud?
Of course I can. I am disabled, and I'm very, very proud.
Oh, thank you so much for coming on today. I really loved this conversation. And I
It's been a
actually
pleasure.
I've learned a lot because, as I said, like sight loss and vision is so far removed from my disability that I love talking to people with different disabilities because I think it gives me like a completely different perspective. And I've loved talking to you. So thanks so much for giving up some of your time to come on today.
Oh no, I'm really glad. I've really enjoyed it as well. Thank you.
Thank you.